Okay, welcome to our session. We're going to be talking about social media and its role in the news environment. Before I get started, I just wanted to thank the Saudi Press Agency for putting this all together, as well as the other organizers. And also, I think I can speak for all of us by saying thank you for inviting us and asking us not only to attend, but to be part of what's being presented here. My name's Iv Nawc. I am the social media editor at the Associated Press. So that means essentially I'm running our social efforts across our news organization, everything from how we manage our social accounts to social news gathering to maintaining standards around social. So what we're going to be discussing today is the important and evolving role of social media in journalism. Now, it's interesting from just listening to the first session that's already happened that this is clearly an interesting topic for an awful lot of people who've gathered here. I know a lot of the questions related to social and a lot of the presentations touched on it as well. So we're going to dig a little deeper and hopefully get a little further into some of the same issues and bring up some other ones as well. And I hope that people will start thinking of some questions that they can ask us as we get toward the end, because we would love to take your questions either on the material that we're going to cover or really anything related to social media and news gathering. So before we dive in too much, I just want to talk a little bit about why social media is important to the news gathering process. Excuse me. So one of the illustration that I like to give to sort of demonstrate the importance of social in news is what has happened during the many protests and uprisings around the Arab Spring. Social media has a lot of different ways that it works with journalism, but one of the most important outlets is the news gathering effort. And there have been a number of times during the Arab Spring protests where it might have been literally impossible to report the story without having access to the kind of information and content that was being distributed over social media. What you're looking at here on the screen, I'm hoping you can see it. Yes, you can. This is one of the many photos that AP has distributed over the last few years from the various protests and uprising. This particular one was from Hama in Syria. It was taken in July of 2011. It happens to be a pretty stunning image, so I like to show it. But this was taken by a member of the public, by somebody who was at the protest, who had a pretty nice view of the crowd, and we were able to get it and vet it and access it and use it. If we couldn't find, verify, and distribute content shared by amateurs on social, we couldn't tell the story of what happened in Syria that day or on many other days. So, using social tools well is essential to the modern pursuit of journalism. Using them badly, as I think has already been discussed a little bit, can cause a news organization to fall badly behind, or worse, to get a story wrong, or even to put journalists or sources in danger. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce all of my fellow panelists who are here, and then I'm going to give a little bit of a talk, and then they're each going to do that as well. So, bring this back on the screen. I don't know how well you can read it. I've got Twitter handles for each one of our panelists. It seems like for the social media session we ought to do that. So that's me. My Twitter handle is Eric Carvin. And then we have Maha Abu Lenin. Did I get that right?
Pretty close.
Okay, I've just learned her pronunciation just now. Yes.
Can you reduce the speed of the speech before translation?
Sure. So Maha she's the head of global communication and public affairs for the Middle East and North Africa at Google. And her Twitter handle, I don't even know how to pronounce her handle. I think it's Maha Gaber or something along those lines. Maha Gaber? Okay. Then we have Caroline Frost, who's actually at the end over there. She's an entertainment editor at Huffington Post UK. And she is Frostalicus on Twitter. And finally, in between them is Daren Waters, the head of devices and social media for apps, media, and publishing at Microsoft UK. So each of us is going to spend about 10 minutes discussing an important aspect of how social media is used in journalism. We're going to cover a lot of ground, I think, in that period of time. And then we'll move into a little discussion of key issues during which we're going to, as I said, be very happy to take your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and speak first and talk a little bit about something that's very near and dear to my heart that Gary Pruitt actually touched on quite eloquently in the last session. What I like to call getting it right and treating sources right. This is an important element of social media-based news gathering. We are very proud at AP of our ability not only to find content on social, but to have a consistent and reliable process for making sure it's accurate, for getting permission to use content that we want to use, and making sure that we're not doing anything to put anybody in danger. So I'm just gonna bring this slide back up just to talk a little bit about the process. So what we do when we find a piece of content over social media. Let's take this photo found on Twitter, as many are. The first thing that we do when we're trying to determine whether we're going to use this content is at the same time we want to analyze the reliability of the source of the content and the reliability of the content itself. We look at the social history, as we like to call it, of the person who tweeted the content in this case. Does it make sense that they would be where they claim to be at this moment? Did it come out of nowhere? Do they have a habit of tweeting photos from significant news events in different places around the world? If that's the case, they probably didn't take the picture. And we're also looking at the content itself, both from a technical perspective, examining it for any kind of flaws or signs of tampering, and also from, I guess you could say, a more journalistic perspective. And this is what Gary was referring to before that's so important. We bring the content to our people who are in the region where the story is based so they can examine the image. Only there do people have the expertise in the location, the language, the accents, the story, the culture that is absolutely essential to be able to determine whether a piece of content is legitimate. And that's what we did with this. And only then and only then are we comfortable moving forward and using a piece of content from an accuracy standpoint. At the same time, we are going through the process of getting permission to use the content. So this is the thing. We want to reach out every single time to whoever created the content, and we're doing it for two reasons. We want to talk to them, ask questions that will help us assess the accuracy of that content, and be reporters, frankly, and think about whether they seem to be reliable and whether what they're saying matches up with the story that we're aware of. And at the same time, we want to get permission to use the content. We feel that just as we wouldn't want AP content to be used without permission, we don't feel it's right to use the content of others without getting their permission and then giving them proper credit if they want it. So, I'm just going to go through a few examples here. I don't know if everybody has seen this photo before. It's a little bit different from I think it was a Hugo Chavez example before. This is supposedly a picture of Edward Snowden on an airplane leaving Moscow several months ago. It turned up an awful lot of places online, and we were able to determine very quickly that this is a fake photo. In this case, and this is a good illustration of the fact that you need to take each piece of content individually and think about it as a reporter. In this case, the dead giveaway, above all else, is that if you look at the image of Snowden in the middle, it's the very same photo of Edward Snowden that everybody was using in the news media at the time, essentially cut out and stuck into a picture of a plane. This isn't so as an egregious example, but the fact is that even in cases that seem obvious and that seem fake, if you don't take the time, you can make mistakes, and it can be very, very bad. So I want to move along here. This is a different sort of example. This is actually a screenshot from a YouTube video. One of the things that we found is that just as it's getting easier and easier to fake content. What's that? Oh, did I lose the screen? I'm sorry. Oh. Are we back? Sorry. I should get a mirror. Okay. Just as it's getting easier to fake content, it's also becoming just as common to find content that we think is fake that turns out to be real because we're so on edge and so concerned about getting it right. I don't know if anybody in the room saw this, but on Election Day in the U.S. last year, there was a YouTube video that made the rounds from the state of Pennsylvania that showed somebody using a touchscreen voting machine, and they were touching Barack Obama, and Mitt Romney's name was lighting up. And they did it over and over and over. They would touch Barack Obama, and Mitt Romney would light up. I saw this, and my immediate reaction was, this is fake. Anybody could create this. Somebody's trying to make a point or trying to make a joke, which is so common. But it turned out it was real. But the way that we found out that it was real is, I think, the lesson of this particular example, which is we found out it was real by calling the local election officials and asking. It seems like such a simple thing, but it's still the best way to verify content is to be reporters and report. And the election officials said they had a machine that malfunctioned, the wrong name was coming up, they took it out of service. We knew that we had a story. Others were sharing this video before we did. We waited until we had that confirmation, and we're perfectly comfortable with that delay. Because many other times we wait and discover that something is fake, and then they were particularly glad that we waited. I wanted to talk for a second about, now this is, I talked about not just getting it right, but also treating our sources right. One of the issues we come across a lot in the news industry is content being used without proper permission and without giving appropriate credit to those who created the content. What you're looking at here is a photo, I hope you can see it well. This is a photo that's from a train derailment that happened in France several months ago. And it's a photo that somebody put on Instagram and on Twitter. And you'll see it's a very good image. The accident happened right at a station, and you can see the train that's started to bend, and part of the platform has been damaged. It's very vivid, and in fact, when we examined the photo, we determined that it was in fact a legitimate photo. There was no accuracy issue here. The thing that was strange, if you look down in the bottom left corner of the screen as I change slides, you'll see a different username. We found the same photo being distributed by two different people on Twitter, and it was exactly the same, and both users made it sound like they'd taken the picture. This happens from time to time, and if you looked at news sites that day, you'll see this photo on many sites, some crediting it to one user, others crediting it to another user. So we did a little more research, we reached out, we contacted them, we asked a very simple question that often gets forgotten, which is, did you take this photo? The first one said no, and then the second one said no. But the second one also said, but I know who did, and here's his phone number. So we went through this process, and we were able to reach out to the person who took the photo, who didn't post it on any social network. He simply texted it to his friend who posted it. And then we were able to reach out to him, not only get access to this photo, but to many others. This is actually a photo that moved on the AP photo wire that was taken by the real photographer of that other image. This is something you wouldn't find on social media until we shared it there, because we were able to reach out to somebody in person and make that connection. And then the last issue that I like to touch on, because I think it doesn't really get enough, it doesn't really take up enough of the conversation when it comes to social news gathering, are issues of sensitivity and safety and danger around these efforts. So what you're looking at here is a picture from a memorial service after the attack on the school in Newtown, Connecticut, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Many children were killed. This is a picture from a public service, a public memorial service. You can see these are parents holding a photo of their child. The reason I'm using this is to illustrate something that happened in Newtown and that happened in some other similar news events, which is that some people who were using Twitter and other tools to reach out to those who were caught up in a news event weren't particularly sensitive about the way they used those tools. In many cases, they were asking for a photo of a child who had died and didn't necessarily put a lot of thought in how they did that. So at AP, we actually have a set of guidelines that addresses this sort of situation, as well as an important parallel situation where somebody who's sharing social content may be in a very dangerous place. Maybe they're in a war zone. Maybe they're on the scene of a crime that's still taking place. Maybe there's a natural disaster going on around them. Similarly, it's important, we feel at AP, to not feel that it is the job of these amateur journalists to go out on assignments for us. We should never be asking anyone to put themselves in danger for a story, and in fact, we should be warning them not to put themselves in danger. If there's something that they've gathered without our encouragement and they want to share it with us, then that can be fine and we can use it. So for covering all of these situations, we at AP put together a set of guidelines, sort of a supplement to our overall social media guidelines about social news gathering in dangerous and sensitive situations. A lot of journalists at AP, as elsewhere, don't have a lot of experience thinking about these issues, and they certainly don't want to have to figure out how to do it in the heat of the moment when they're covering a big story. So we offer a lot of tips, and that's something that's actually on our website that we've distributed elsewhere, if that's something that's of interest. And you know, it could be as simple to, as I said, urging people to stay out of danger. In some cases, knowing when not to reach out to somebody at all, because doing so might endanger them, and also being very sensitive about any kind of requests related to a loss of a loved one or anything like that. An example is instead of putting out a tweet to them and saying, "I'm sorry about your son. Do you have a photo we could use for our story?" Which may sound like something that you wouldn't expect to see on Twitter, but it has happened. Instead, if we decide it's appropriate to reach out at all, we offer them something. We would love to tell the story of your son. Reach out to us if you would like to share. And that's as far as we're willing to go now. And I think that this is all important. These are all important details, even though they may seem like details. And in fact, a colleague of mine at AP and I have started a new working group as part of the Online News Association, where I've actually just been elected as a board member, that focuses strictly on the ethics and standards around social news gathering, where we're looking to tackle these issues with partners from all around the news industry, all around the world. We're just getting started, but we're hoping. We don't know if we can put together a whole code of ethics around this. I don't know if the entire industry could agree on something quite that specific, but there may be some points of agreement we can come to and some recommendations that we can make, so that's something that we're working on. So anyway, that's mostly what I wanted to talk about, and also I just wanted to emphasize, because I don't think I stated it quite succinctly enough at the beginning, that this part of the use of social media, using it to gather the news, to find content, and to find tips and sources, is far and away the most important thing any journalist can ever do with social media. And I think that's an important point people should always take away. That's what we feel strongly at AP. I meet journalists who are concerned about how they're using Twitter to share their content, and one of the first things I say is, look, you know, master the use of this tool to do better journalism. That's priority one, as it always has been at AP. And I think that's something that should apply across the whole industry. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Amaha. She's going to talk a little bit about the connected world that we live in. We got a preview of this from the last session, but she's going to take it from here. I think we're going to switch seats, so just one moment.
Thank you, Andy. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thank you for having us here today. Actually, we have a really fun panel. We're excited to be here to share with you some of our ideas and insights. Everybody knows what Google is and what Google does, but how we view the internet and the impact on the news industry is taking us and forcing us to think differently about how we do business and how we deliver news. So I think this is something that came up earlier in the presentation by Stephen from Reuters about how we have changed from the 1990s until today, where our devices and our screens have become a big part of our lives today. We live in a connected world. Currently, there are 2.6 billion people online, and we're expected to be about 5 billion people, and it's coming fast. 1.5 billion of those are on smartphones. And this graph that's shown here shows green are PCs and desktops, blue are mobiles, and the orange or the red, those are tablets. So you'll see that the devices that are being shipped the most and the sales that are being surpassed, tablets and mobiles, are now surpassing PCs and desktops. And this trend is only going to continue to rise. So what are they doing online? As a news organization or a news agency, we've touched upon this earlier today. They're watching a lot of video. Gary talked a lot about how we're going to have more news delivered in video format. This is the reason why. 100 billion hours of video are being uploaded or being watched every day on YouTube. By 2016, about 70% of all the internet traffic on the web will be in video format. And 40% of YouTube videos are coming from mobile phones. Users are also sharing a lot of photos. They like to receive photos, they like to share photos, they like to upload photos, and they like to receive photos. About 500 million photos a day, and this number is doubling every year, year over year. And then social, one of the reasons why we're on this panel today. 25% of people share information through social networks, and in emerging markets like Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and the Far East, South Korea, they're doing it at 60%. The mobile is the most ubiquitous device. It is more pervasive in our homes than any other item such as a credit card or a bank account even. Yet news agencies and organizations have yet to really crystallize how the mobile will fit into their strategy. We talk a lot about the information that your mobile, the freedom that it gives you. It reminds us of back in the day, your first sense of freedom was when you got your first car. It allowed you to discover, to explore, to travel, to go places, to see different things. Today, it's the mobile phone. Think about your friends and family or your own who have teenagers. That moment when they get their first phone, that sense of empowerment. They're able to be connected to the world instantly, not only to broadcast and share pictures or information, but to also receive. That sense of empowerment at a very young age is letting them create networks, creating a sense of influence and desires for their own brands and adapting to what they like. And when we think about delivering news, everybody's constantly wanting to be connected. Even at a young age, they want to know information. As news agencies, we have an obligation to make sure we deliver it to them. This shift to constant connectivity is really what's going to drive humanity from the future. And one of the things that we always talk about at Google is that it's already happened. The future is not tomorrow. The future is now. We're not ahead of consumers in this transition. In fact, we're behind. And people spend more time online than they do any other media or activity that we have. And one of the couple of things I'm going to share with you now are a few kind of trends that we see and how people are behaving. So as news agencies, we think about how to adapt the way we deliver news and package it based on how people's habits have changed. So the first one is a multi-screen world. We live in a world where 90% of media interactions are screen-based. So that could be a mobile phone, a desktop, a laptop, a television, or a tablet. And out of those 90% interactions we have with screens, about 40% of those are through smartphones. We also actually have behavior where we use different devices for different things. So for example, people may shop on a tablet, search on a mobile phone, use a desktop for paying bills. People have different habits based on their different devices. And what this shows here on the side here, 81% used for browsing and internet, 67% for shopping online, 46% for managing finances, and 43% for planning a trip. The other interesting thing is that television no longer commands our attention, and it doesn't command our attention fully. So I'm sure this happens at your house. Your family is sitting in the living room. Somebody's watching TV while on their iPad, watching TV while sending a text on their phone, watching TV while playing with or working on their desktop, their laptop. So people do multiple activities sequentially at the same time, and they don't necessarily command their attention to one device at a time. What's changed all this is people have an unbelievable desire for information. At Google, we see 100 billion searches every single month. And people want information, they want to have access to it, they want to be able to get any information they want whenever they want at the tips of their hands, and it's changed fundamentally everything. It changes how companies market themselves, how governments share information, how news organizations disseminate what they do. People have an insatiable appetite for information, and how we make sure that we meet that demand and that appetite is what we're going to talk a lot about today. The first thing is it's a choice economy. Users have a choice, what they want to see, what they don't want to see, what they care to share, and what they don't want to share. And I think one of the most important things about this is that at Google, we always talk about wisdom of the crowd. We don't decide what's popular. It's what the users decide is popular. It's the users decide which information is important to share. It's the users who decide what is the story that they want to tell. What is the video that they make most popular? What is the story that they want to contribute to? And we really have to think about that it's up to the users to decide what content they want to consume and share with other people. Of course, the topic of today's discussion is about social currency. And the social currency of today is sharing. People want recommendations from friends, sharing stories, sharing links, sharing photos, sharing images, sharing texts. And the social currency today is becoming stronger than ever. People want validation from a trusted source. And when they think about the news organizations and agencies, they have a trusted source. They know this is a credible source that's giving them information, and people still want that trusted source when they're looking at information that they consume. And the last thing I wrote down here, which I'll kind of read, is news is not what you tell your customers. News is what your customers tell their friends. At Google, we have something we call the Gen C. And this is the future. This is the generation, what we call the YouTube generation. This is how users' habits have changed and how we need to adapt. And we describe this as the 4 C's, which I'll walk you through right now. The first one is creation. So users generate their own content. They create their own content, they share their own content, and I think you see this even in the news industry. People, the user generation and the citizen journalism is starting to play a really big role in how we find and share the news. 67% of Gen C uploads their own content online. Gen C also likes to be a curator. That means they like to make the trends of what's popular. They decide what is going to have an impact. You'll see this is a big industry for decision-making and for influence. The influencers are the users, and the users are determining what to curate and what to share. Constantly connected, we talked about this before. 91% of people, and I'm sure if I did a show of hands, sleep with their mobile phone next to their bed. It is something that we're just used to doing. We're constantly connecting. Sometimes we will check our email before we get up to go brush our teeth. That is Gen C, and that is the way that people are consuming information today. The last thing which I talked about on social is the community. They have this sense of community. They need to share, suggest, recommend, comment, like. This is only going to continue to grow. And so with all this information out there, how do you create content that is shareable? How do you create content that people want to suggest, retweet, like, or recommend? Last but not least, it's an app world. People do all of their transactions now, and the trend is growing, in applications. So as a news agency, making sure you have an application, people have the sense of what we call nowism. When they see something, they want it now. They want to go in an app, they want to push, they want to buy, they want to move forward. And so having an application is key, because as you see the numbers on the screen, the application market is only going to continue to grow, and it's a huge source of revenue for advertisers, for marketers, for companies, and also for news agencies. So just to conclude, a couple of the key takeaways is looking at the rise of tablets, the aggressive momentum in terms of mobile, how we're constantly connected, how users are generating and sharing their own content, and the issue of nowism. And when we look at the news industry, there are a couple of things, just to conclude, this is my last slide, that talk about how our implications on the news industry. And I think when I think about it, I think about a meal. So before, we used to sit down and have a meal and watch the evening news or watch something on television to get our meal of news. Today, we snack throughout the day. We check our Twitter handle. We check a link from a friend. We want to consume news all day, not when someone's serving it up to me. So when we look about news becoming more personalized, I think this is one of the trends that we're going to see going forward, that people will be able to personalize what they want to eat, when they want to eat it, and how they want it delivered to them. The second thing is, and I would be remiss if I didn't discuss this because I'm from Google, is that algorithms will get better at predicting tastes. Are you interested in looking at video? Are you interested in looking at photos? Do you prefer entertainment news? Do you like breaking news? Are you following sports? The algorithms and how our habits will get better at predicting what kind of news a user wants and be able to serve that meal to them as they take it. Journalism will be more open-ended, and by that we mean that we're going to be focusing on making sure that you don't have to worry about columns and centimeters or a number of minutes. Like right now, you'll see Instagram allows 15 seconds of video, and Twitter is 140 characters. I think there are going to be unlimited changes to that and how people can consume content and consume information. And last, there'll be more appetite for content, news, and information driven by social. Again, looking at the most shared links on any kind of site that comes up, or making sure that there's some information that's out there that's going to probably get a higher ranking for you when you do your search results or when you come to look and consume for news. I'm excited about the future, and I hope that you are too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maha. I have to say, first of all, that your analogies are making me very hungry. But I think there are a couple of interesting points that we'll have an opportunity to expand on here. First of all, I think in some ways I took the easy part of this when I talked about news gathering, because it's something that's automatically and easily relevant to a news agency, because we all have to gather the news. When it gets to things like the engagement and building communities, there are going to be specific challenges to being a wholesaler of news that we face at AP, and I'm sure many of you do as well. And as we go through the rest of our speakers, we're going to touch on some of those issues. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker. It's Caroline Frost at Huffington Post.
Good afternoon. So thank you, Maha. There were some pretty impressive statistics, and Eiric has already touched on some of the challenges that comes with news gathering social. So I just want to touch on a couple of examples of the implications that the social media age is now bearing on a news provider, for example, the Huffington Post. So back in the day of print, I don't know how many people remember that, we had some paper and typewriter ribbon and scissors, and obtaining the news was everything. Putting it on the page, producing it, once we had it in our hands, was a relatively simple, linear process. We tweaked, we wrote, we produced, and we handed it over to the magical powers of the sub-editors in their magical room elsewhere. Once that was the case, they would put it on the front page, was obviously their priority, where in an ideal world we would have a Hollywood marriage next to a political divorce, ideally with some sort of gift for readers sitting at the top of the page. It needed regular maintenance and updating because this was the front door to the house. So as long as that front door was polished and painted, a lot of time was spent basically comparing that front page with rivals and checking that ours was the best. This has obviously all changed for news providers, and social media is a huge contributory factor to that. There's no longer this one front door. Instead, if we imagine our newspaper or news provider is the house, there are limitless windows, chimneys, basements, as many doors to the news organization as there are readers, potential readers, and articles of the, for example, 1,600 articles that the Huffington Post provides on a daily basis. So that's how things have changed now. Why is that limitless windows? Because a huge number of our readers, as Maha has discussed, find us through not opening our front door anymore, but opening their own front door and stepping out into a world of Google searches, Facebook shares, Twitter referrals, retweets, email newsletters, friends and colleagues sharing emails at lunchtime with shocking, sometimes comedic, sad, funny, but all sorts of items going around the world with no one person in a newspaper or news organization having to send a button anymore. And this new wave of information sharing has consequences for journalism and the way we go about things. So to continue my metaphor of this house, it means the whole house has to be tidy and ready for visitors at all times and in all rooms. The Huffington Post brand, for example, is built on values as transparency, progressiveness, trust, community, and these have to be evident no longer just on that important front door, that front page, but every article, every site, every section, every video we share, every tweet potentially, even every reader's comment does come back to reflect on us. Why is this so important? Because there is no longer the chance to hide something on page 23 that we might be embarrassed about, an apology we have to make to something or somebody we got wrong or offended or insulted. There's nowhere to tuck away that rebuttal. In fact, back to my house, and we can call this behind the sofa approach, which I'm sure many journalists, perhaps hopefully not in this room, may recognize. Anything uninteresting or dirty or dusty or in some other way something we're not very proud of, because possibly in theory, that isn't the back of the sofa for many of our readers. That back of the sofa may in fact be the front door for them to come in. So we have to hope that that is the case, because it means all our social media strategies that these chaps are talking about are actually doing their job, and it means they've been worth the hundreds of man-hours that we are now dedicating to it. It also means we can't be sure who our visitors are anymore, because they're no longer the same people we've always attracted. We can't predict what age they are, what gender, what political party they support, what interests they have. This guest list has been torn up. It's a crowded room. It's full of perhaps annual guests, occasional visitors, and obviously sometimes gatecrashers whose only intention is to stand around and criticize everything they see. And the name for that is trolls. So every reader, therefore, has to be treated like a VIP coming through that front door with respect and integrity and all the points that Eirik has raised about the accuracy that is the part of the social news gathering. No section is any longer any more important than any of the others. The ranking system has been eliminated. So the challenge then becomes not just finding the news, writing it, producing it, but we have to find in this crowded market the aspect of each news outlet that makes us unique. This is our voice, and ensure that it ripples through every article so that readers do recognize the house they've come to visit. We have to attend to every reader's different need and yet remain integrated across the site. Content has to be diverse and yet united. So this then is one of the paradoxes of modern journalism. The biggest addition I can verify is to the modern journalist's workload is spreading the word on social media. In my particular experience, the most important of these at the moment is Facebook, which has its own limitless windows to deal with. As well as having our own Facebook page for every section of the Huffington Post, we want to reach community pages, fan sites, special interest pages, and these have all replaced, Facebook in one fell swoop has replaced huge numbers of fan forums and special interests. Now we've got this go-to place. Similarly with Twitter, as well as our own accounts for each section and the main Huffington Post accounts for each country, we have to reach special interest accounts, individual tweeters that might be interested and want to reshare, and fans accounts if it's a personality or a public figure. There are several rules to this new game. We have to consider timing for maximum reach, trying to match our tweets to communal events like sports matches, perhaps X Factor finals. There are etiquettes, for example, when to add a hashtag to some content. For example, recently, the wonderful musician Lou Reed died in America, and we were very keen to share our celebration of his life with his music and all of our collection of his material. But it would have been unseemly to add the hashtag Lou Reed to his name. It would have looked as though we were cashing in. So there are obviously occasions when we have to step back from that and let people come to us, painful though it may be. Other times, this decorum is not necessary. In a breaking news event, we want to be seen pushing it out there because that's all part of the brand. So suddenly there's that delicate balance to strike. On Twitter, we have to look polite, not something that always comes naturally to journalists. We have to, even much as it pains us, retweet rival websites so that we develop a reputation as a trustworthy purveyor of content, not just our own. We have to gain credibility for keeping our eyes are open around the world and not just on our keyboards. And hopefully if we retweet them, then they may retweet us. So if you look at these facets that I've described, we've got rules, timing, sensitivity, decorum, sharing, good manners. Suddenly we can see that, contrary to how we might see it superficially, these actually mirror the real-life necessities of human interaction, and that today's journalists are having to at least recognise these skills, if not master them, in ways that we've seldom been given credit for in the past, and certainly more than journalists ever had to do when we worked alone in windowless, smoky rooms, and our only challenge was to chase our story, bag it, write it, and get our coats. So we're seeing that for journalists in the social media age, having the story in our hands is actually only the beginning and the very simplest part of the exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. I think we're going to have to do another game of musical chairs, as we call it, where I'm from. But I thought one thing that struck me that was particularly interesting was the notion of a news organization finding its voice or having understanding what its own character is, and trying to be consistent with that. And one thing that I think would be interesting for us to talk about going forward, and maybe we could do this during discussion later, is how to apply that notion in more of a wholesale environment. I think every news organization in the world, whether you're the Huffington Post or whether you're, say, a state news agency, is going to want to have a particular voice or a character, and I think that's something maybe we can go into deeper later. But let's move over to Daren. This is Daren Waters, who once again is from Microsoft UK. He's the head of devices and social media for apps, media, and publishing, and has one of the longest titles I've ever come across. I'm going to hand it over to Daren, who's actually going to focus very heavily on how all of this applies quite specifically to the world of news agencies.
Thanks, Eric. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to the Saudi Press Agency for the invite today. It's much appreciated. I wanted to talk a bit about news agencies and publishers, because in this context, I'm the publisher, I'm your customer. I want to talk to you about how social has changed our relationship, and some of the things I'd like to see change, perhaps in the services you offer us in the future. Now, I have some slides. I work for Microsoft. It's part of my contract to deliver PowerPoint slides to you, so forgive me. So, in my role at Microsoft, we work with some of the biggest news agencies in the world, and are delighted to do so, from the Press Association to AP, Reuters to FA, and as well as to news organizations like the BBC, The Guardian, and New York Times. In fact, today we have around 200 different media companies that partner with us, and they all have something in common. There's not a credible news organization or publisher among them that does not rely upon your work as news agencies. You are a critical part of that business. You're a critical part of our business. And if you fail, we all fail. So it's in my interest to make sure that we work together to find that success. And the truth is, this has always been the case. That's a picture of me from a very long time ago reading the news in Wales. And as a young TV reporter reading the news, I had to give the football results in my country. But we didn't have reporters in every game giving the results. We relied upon a news agency to provide that result via CFAX, which was a TV tech service from the BBC. And we trusted that result. When the result came through via CFAX from the agency, we treated it as fact. We didn't verify it. We didn't second source it. It was fact to us. I delivered that result on air to, thousands of people, and I relied upon the agency to get it right. It was journalism through trust. And when I later worked at the BBC, certain news agencies were treated as fact. What those news agencies reported to us was ironclad. And that relationship of trust is still very, very important today. And when I think about how we publish your content into our apps and our websites across the world to millions of people, that trust, relying on those facts, remains the most important thing to me. And there are kind of four broad areas that I look for from agencies. I need you to report the world from local to global. I need you to provide the facts at speed with accuracy. I need your insight, context, and expertise, and I need your data and your innovation. But the question I increasingly ask is, how is social impacting on those functions? And it's clear that you're asking the same questions. How is it disrupting what I need? How is it disrupting what you're able to deliver? So I want us to spend a few minutes looking at that and perhaps asking some questions of you about how social has impacted on your business. So in the past, you were our eyes and ears around the world. We relied upon you to report the world. But today, there are more eyewitnesses armed with a smartphone able to tweet than there are agency reporters. A hashtag, a retweet, a shared link can transport the reader to more places than any wire or agency. Today, we're drowning in data, and it's increasingly hard to derive anything editorially meaningful from that data. It's not the data that I need, it's the signal from the noise. I need to understand the audience response. And I worry that in the social age, that facts are becoming less important than they once were to large parts of the audience. Does the audience crave facts, or does it crave information? We have a generation of disconnected, connected people. The real-time nature of social media has sped up the news gathering, the verification, and reporting. Everything has become process journalism. But should we separate those inputs from the outputs? And isn't everyone reporting the same thing anyway? In the grab on the screen, you can see the BBC, ITV, CNN, all reporting exactly the same incident within minutes of each other on Twitter in real time. Because the question I ask increasingly is, does anybody own breaking news anymore? You know, where did I learn about the Obama victory? Did I learn about it from an agency, or did I learn about it from Obama himself tweeting the news? And is the audience increasingly worried about where they're getting their information from? Are they developing alternative sources of what they see as facts and information? And when we do rely upon important trusted sources, there are other concerns. This is Wirra Davis, who's a very, very fine correspondent for the BBC. And he had trouble recently with the regulatory body of the BBC because one of his tweets, among many, was inaccurate. And the BBC's social media editor said that Twitter was not live broadcast and the tweet should not be seen in isolation, but in the broader context of subsequent tweets. But should unverified tweets be tweeted as process or as facts? How does the audience tell the difference? Is there so much process that fact is becoming irrelevant? And indeed, if we publish corrections, does anybody see those corrections? So on the left-hand side, you see CNN tweeting one particular story, and then a few minutes later, they corrected it. But what if I didn't see the correction? What if I only saw the first tweet? That becomes fact to me. But despite all of this, our needs remain the same. And the challenge for us is that we as publishers need world-class journalism. We need the audience to feel connected to our content. We need to meet this challenge of the disconnected connected. We need to deal with the data deluge. We need to innovate increasingly at light speed. We've got to build a business together, we've got to build an audience together, and we need news agencies to do that. So what can we perhaps do together? Verification. Eirik's talked a lot about this. So in a world of 1 million retweets, of the echo chamber of social, of the race to tweet quickly, how much more value can you as agencies add? Because in a breaking news story, it's increasingly impossible only to report the facts. Because the reality is the audience wants the color, they want the nuance, they want to hear about the unverified elements of a story. But how do we communicate to them those things on a platform like Twitter, which actually is quite simple in what it can deliver? Why don't news agencies work with Twitter as a platform to help in the verification of social? We have verified users, after all, the little blue tick next to a name. Why can't we develop a platform of trust where certain news agencies can deliver tweets into the stream which are verified as fact at source, so that the user can see that blue tick next to a tweet and trust that this tweet is verified, it's true? Or some tweets in a breaking news story are still hearsay. They're developing. My very bad graphic that I've put together here of the loud hailer, illustrating that this would be an unverified tweet and this would be a verified tweet. Could we develop this standardization for facts on a platform like Twitter or Google or Facebook? There are lots of hurdles, barriers, and most importantly, Twitter perhaps wouldn't want to be seen as a publisher itself and maybe resist this. But I think this could become a critical business function of news agencies, not just fact-checking, but helping publishers verify UGC, not just for your own stories, but on social itself. So in a clumsy example, if there are reports of a bomb going off in a far-flung corner of the world, and there are tweets about it, why aren't agencies acting as a UGC hub to verify that on social before publishing it inside the wire? The BBC has its own UGC hub independently verifying this information. It's one of the few organizations that has the resources to do that. I don't have the resources to do that. This could be a service that you offer, either on your own or together, verifying social information at source. This is a service I think would be increasingly valuable for news organizations that want to be sure that information on social is correct. The Guardian recently released its Witness app, encouraging its users to participate in storytelling. And I absolutely agree with Eiric that there are many situations where you would not encourage users to go out and be reporters in dangerous parts of the world. But the Guardian's experiment in formalizing the capture of user information and user-generated content is a fascinating experiment. And I wonder why agencies haven't done this. Why has the Guardian done this? Where is the Witness app from news agencies? How are you involving the audience in your journalistic output? Because increasingly, I'm interested less and less in buying just stories from news agencies. I think this was touched upon by the panel earlier. Buying a feed of stories is important, but I'm more interested in organic news information, social information delivered with the story. I want the process, the speed, and the facts. Now, as publishers, we're struggling to adapt to the social age. As news agencies, I know you're adapting to the social age too, and I look forward to working together to crack this problem in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. A lot to chew on there. I'm wondering if we could ask if anybody has any questions that they'd like to bring to us. I have a few thoughts myself, but I'd like to give the audience the first crack at asking questions. Is there a microphone that will be running? Okay, great. So if anybody has any questions, you could raise your hand, and if not, I definitely can push forward otherwise. So one thing that kept coming to mind for me, and keep thinking if you'd like. One thing that kept coming to mind for me, and Darren, maybe you can address this first. I kept asking myself over and over, what of this applies to the news agency world, to the wholesale world? And it occurred to me that perhaps one of the reasons why news agencies haven't done something like create a UGC hub is because they perhaps face greater challenges developing a community of users when, in fact, they're not distributing directly to users, but through other news organizations. Do you have any thoughts about how to overcome that barrier, or whether it even is one in the first place?
I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, you're not consumer brands in that sense, but you do deliver content via XML feeds often to partners. And I wonder why social information isn't included as part of that XML feed. Why aren't you automatically sending us the most relevant and important tweets directly as part of that story, so that when I publish it into my apps or my website, I'm not just seeing the story, I'm seeing the social context in real time. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing verified tweets right next to the story. Because we know from looking at Twitter that people are just retweeting anything they see on Twitter as fact. They're accepting any source. They're caring less and less about the brands and where the information came from. What their friend retweeted is as important as whether the BBC tweeted it. And that's kind of scary to me as an old-fashioned journalist. But if you could provide that brilliant news story, that brilliant piece of context, together with that social information, which you verified, that to me is a really compelling package of information for my website.
Okay, and I'm gonna come back to something that I brought up before in between a couple of the talks. And Caroline, maybe you can look at this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about how a wholesaler of news can develop a voice? I know it may be hard to come up with one answer because we're many news agencies of many flavors here. But you know, when you're unlike, say, the Huffington Post, which has a very outward-facing presence in terms of a website, mobile app, and all of those things, how can this be accomplished in more of a wholesale world?
Perhaps you have to take yourself as an individual first and be relentlessly honest and say, who am I? Am I funny? Am I political? What are my interests? Am I broad? Am I comedic? Am I kind? Am I ruthless? What am I more interested in? Truth or intention? Such things that all individual people worry about, and then say to themselves, am I now working for the right place? And in theory, I like to think that if you have enough of those same people in one room, then that will create a collective voice of the type you're talking about. I mean, it's a pretty hard question because the demand for news does to some extent then influence the supply. I mean, we find this, obviously, we'd all like to be writing important stuff, but we know that sometimes the less important stuff gets the clicks, and that's just the deal. But hopefully, if you look at things like in traditional print newspapers, The Guardian is a very different voice from the Times, the New York Times, the Arabic News. And so this has been passed online when you would go to something like the Drudge Report for a very different portrayal than perhaps the Huffington Post. So I guess it is that just trying to stick, perhaps digging into a list of principal values and just being really governing, policing, in checking that they are evident in every single article you post.
And so it's interesting. I guess in a lot of cases, character is determined by values. And if you're a news agency that maybe has less of a public footprint, you still have the values that go into the way you pursue your journalism.
I would think it's an opportunity to actually work your values up in a way that perhaps ones that have been around longer and are broader don't have that opportunity anymore.
Right. Great. And Darren, you had something on this?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think it's about partnership. I think the days are gone where we just buy a feed from a news agency and plug it into a website and you just have a module with rotating feeds. We want to get away from that. We want to build a genuine partnership where we together discuss the kinds of content we want from a news agency. And I love the idea that someone had earlier about having embedded reporters from agencies in the publishers. You know, at Microsoft, we have someone from AP in the office in Seattle. I think that kind of partnership building is really important.
Great, thank you. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Oh, right here in the front.
Thank you. As I understand it, the MSN and the Huffington Post have satisfactory agreements with news agencies, and thereby you're paying your fees. You would have a similar interest with the news agencies to fight against piracy, unauthorized use of content, not just piracy, but also commercial use of other people's products, which is another question. It's commercial laws and so on. So do you see any future cooperation coming up between companies like yours and news agencies? Because if you don't, all this about partnership and so on, it's just part of it.
I think that the point was made by the CEO of AP earlier is that revenues are declining for everyone. We're having to find new sources of revenue, and that impacts how much money we can spend on content. So a lot of it is incumbent on us to find new models of revenue, and whether that's through better use of advertising, smarter use of advertising. The need for high-quality, world-class journalism isn't going to go away. The truth is we're finding it harder and harder to pay for, because the advertising model isn't there. But that's almost our problem to solve. And we hope that the things like clever targeting, but with the respect of the user, native advertising, sponsored editorial, advertorial, these are all models that we're exploring so we can keep on buying high-quality content, because we know users want it, because they respond to it constantly.
Well, I think part of what was also being asked, and I can obviously sort of sympathize with this being at the AP, is there's an awful lot of unauthorized use of news agency content around the world, and perhaps there might be a role in a company like Microsoft that has a relationship with these news organizations and has a very important role in the technology infrastructure, and as Google does as well, as obviously, to help police this. Because one of the best sources of revenue that I could think we could have at AP is for people to steal our stuff less often. I know it seems very simplified in a way, but a lot of resources go into creating content, and it's important for news agencies to get value out of it.
I know we're asked to police the internet a lot, from lots of different bodies. It's way above my pay grade to answer.
Fair enough. Okay, was there another question? Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, Bruce Davidson from AAP. Mahar, a question for you really. You talked about the 4Cs, the Gen C, users of information, and we've heard also from other panellists that a lot of that generation really are not that interested in the source. They're not that interested in necessarily the verification. They're actually just interested in the information, and in some cases, just cases, the entertainment value. What's your view, and perhaps whether it's a wider Google view that is actually going to overtake those traditional sources and probably just so disrupt the news information services that everything's going to change?
Yeah, I think one thing is for sure things are changing, and it's going to continue to do so. I guess on your question about the sources and people not caring, like Darren said, people want information. Do they want information or do they want facts? It's a valid point. I think as news agencies, I think our challenge is to make sure that we're trying to listen to what users are consuming and how they're consuming it. So, by having a mobile phone in the device of every user that you have real-time access globally to have focus groups. You know what they're consuming, how they're consuming it, what they're sharing, how they're sharing it. Use that data for your business. Leverage that data. The internet is great because it gives your stories global distribution. But it's what you do with that information that as a news agency, you should start to think about what kind of content is being shared more, is being digested more, how can we target the niche audiences, focusing on what people are interested in. And I think that you're absolutely right. I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know how users' behaviors are going to change, where they just want to share and spread information or they really want to get to the facts. Google just organizes it. We don't determine. But I think it's a valid point and something we need to think about. And I think as journalists and as news agencies, we're challenged to make sure that the information we get out there is what we believe in, credible, trusted. It's the right information that we're disseminating at the right time.
It's interesting. I think I wonder if there's a little bit of an overstatement of the notion that people don't care about what is and isn't accurate. I think that maybe people are more obsessed with information than anything else, but they certainly would prefer for it to be right, which perhaps isn't up to the sort of standards that we would like, but it's something maybe we can work with. One thing that we found at AP with our particular Twitter following is some of the most popular tweets that we've ever put out in terms of the engagement that they've created have been the ones where we are setting the record straight about something that others are reporting incorrectly. Those tweets do incredibly well. And similarly, when we're covering a news event, let's say that it's a political debate or anything else, very, very often political stories. The stories where when we put out any kind of fact check, where we go through what was said and say this was true, this was false, based on the authority that we have, again, generally the most popular story of the day for AP. There's an appetite for correct information. Yeah. One thing I wonder, Maha, and this is something I've thought about a few times before, and I know Google considers itself to be more of a platform company and a company that provides the services and devices through which people share content. But do you think there might be a role for a company like Google to get more involved in the process of separating reliable from unreliable, true from false, maybe working with the world's news agencies, as Darren was alluding to with the verified tweets, working with the news agencies to in some way maybe better highlight the more accurate content or give some kind of preferred rating to those who are more reliable or something along those lines.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, this whole concept of wisdom of the crowd, it really works. People do call things out. People do flag things. Even, for example, on YouTube, if we have videos that are seen controversial or have bad content or negative content that violates our guidelines, it's not Google who flags and takes it down. It's usually the users who come to us and tell us, this content doesn't seem right, and so we go through a process and we might take down that video based on that process. So I think, yes, the answer to your question is yes, we have a role to help in that, but I think we rely heavily on our users. Our users are the ones that are calling things out, being more transparent. People want accuracy, and people want to know the facts, and they have a right to know, and they make sure that they get the right information that they have.
Okay.
Maha, I know when we met earlier in this year, you talked to me about the journalism fellowships that Google sponsor, and I just wondered how supporting young journalists and then how that plays into the overall Google strategy.
I can talk about, it's an initiative that actually we started here in MENA, and it's actually, we're doing a lot of work globally, we started something called the Google Media Academy, because we know there's so much happening with technology and it's changing every day, and the journalist toolbox has changed completely. So how, like, even Huffington Post Live, how they do their broadcasts now, there's no cameras, there's no cameramen, it's through the internet. They use Google Plus as one of their platforms to do that. So, like, the newsroom of the future is changing. So we do extensive training. In MENA alone, we've trained about 4,000 journalists on how to use YouTube to find the news and broadcast the news, how to use search, how to get data, how to use maps, how to integrate. People love infographics. They love to share them. They love to read them. They can tell a story in a much better way than you could by writing a narrative. So we focus a lot about training journalists on the new tools, how to be ready for the next digital age in terms of being a journalist in today's environment. There are so many competing news agencies and competing news organizations, and you're competing with users who are creating their own content. So we have to make sure that we're making sure the news industry doesn't fall behind, and that actually they lead in terms of how they communicate on the web, and to leverage that global distribution that their story will get. And so we do a lot of training on that. And then we have fellowships with journalists to make sure if they want to come to Google and spend some time learning about how we do everything from YouTube and broadcast to Google Plus. And actually, Al Jazeera did a very interesting experience where their cameras went down in Tahrir Square, and they used their mobile phone to broadcast live from the camera of their phone. And it was a really amazing moment on how things are changing real time and live, and it's really giving us access to tell stories like we could never tell before.
I want to ask another question. It's sort of something that came to mind. I think it was when you were talking, Maha, before. This is something that probably you and Caroline could both address. So, Maha, you were talking about the algorithm, and obviously the algorithm is king at Google. And I wonder how news organizations can balance this new world of algorithms and metrics against the news judgment that we've always had from the beginning, and that we obviously cling to this day. How do we balance whatever there's an appetite for versus what we know to be important news, and how do we handle that situation?
Well, when an algorithm can learn about the articles you spend more time reading, as opposed to the ones that you've skipped. So I think in more time it'll help you craft. The algorithm will be able to tell you, predict what's important to you, what's personalized. I think something that Google's working on, making sure that the algorithm, every day we are updating Google search like 2,000 times a day. We're making updates to it. So we're always trying to make sure it's stronger and better at predicting what you're thinking, what you want, what you're searching for. And this hasn't really been applied to news yet. And so we're working on that. We're making sure that when you search for articles, you search for news and what you're consuming, it'll get better at predicting what kind of news to serve to you. So making sure that as a news agency, the way you post your content, the way you tag your content, it's easily to be discovered, so it can be easily shared. I think, I don't know the formula to making sure that your stuff gets in the algorithm right. I'm not privileged to know that.
We can talk separately after the
But there are ways to make sure that when people are searching for something, your content gets put at the top of that list for the algorithm.
One of the challenges that I think we face at AP, and I'm sure any news organization that ever breaks news probably does as well, is we find sometimes our best, most important, most valuable, and I think what will be the most engaging stories are ones that might not catch on based on an algorithm or might not make a trending list because we're simply reporting something that nobody knows to care about yet because it's new. And I think that's maybe something that Google needs to think of moving forward, is how to capture the notion of newsworthy novelty when you're serving content.
The layer is the social layer. So it's what you think people need to know versus what people want to know. So
Right,
the
right.
social layer is what may take a story and take it off. And
Right.
I can think of like videos that we thought no one would care about became enormously popular and viral because somebody shared it.
Right.
And that's really the influencer who's taking your news and sharing it. So making sure your news is being read and shared by an influencer is really a key to making it go from being viewed versus viral.
There.
No, I just wanted to add to that. I think this is an issue that we've grappled with at Bing as well, around the algorithm and the value of the algorithm. And what we ultimately decided was that you need a layer of human curation. So when we launched the Bing News product in 20 markets around the world, we put an editorial team in each of those markets. To your point, is that an algorithm doesn't know that a story is important. It only knows when other people think it's important. But it often takes a journalist to know that's a really important story. We need to publish that right now, or ring up a partner like PA and say, do you have a live blog available? Let's go with it now, because sometimes the algorithm will often lag.
You know, there's an interesting parallel to this in the Facebook news feed. I don't know if everybody knows how Facebook decides what you get to see when you go to Facebook. You obviously don't see everything by everyone you're friends with or you follow. Maybe you think you do, but at this point, that would be so much content that you would never get to the bottom of it all. Facebook makes decisions for you about what shows up based on what you have cared about in the past, what your friends care about and have shared and commented on, things along those lines. What's interesting is that Facebook, which is admittedly a little bit mysterious about this process, says that they have adjusted their algorithm that decides on this content in order to raise up substantive content more highly and to push down superficial content that people have told them in focus groups they don't actually care about. There's an example that somebody put up a post on Facebook that said something along the lines of, like this post if you like cats, and comment on this post if you like dogs. That post got a lot of likes and a lot of comments, and under the old system would show up at the top of everybody's Facebook feed. If you ask people who use Facebook, is this a sort of post you want to look at, nearly everyone says no. So we're hopeful, at least, that this will provide a little bit of benefit to news organizations, but it sort of shows that the automated processes need to really be refined in order to make sure that content of substance has a decent role.
Yeah, I don't want to just close on it because I know we have to wrap up, but I think what's really important to think about is what the users think is important, not necessarily what we think is important. Yeah. That's the thing that we focus on at Google. So whatever the users want is what will be popular.
So Caroline, you certainly spend some time balancing. Apologies for reading. Balancing, what your readers are interested in versus, what you probably would like to be delivering them. How do you handle that there?
That is the daily dilemma, and the only way I deal with it personally, and I'm guessing as a group across the board, is to see both as utterly necessary. We like to see it almost as the algorithm stuff, the stuff that is triumphing on Twitter and trending, is almost self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating, and if you only look at that, then you just disappear down a rabbit hole of often meaningless trash that nobody reads and isn't going to build your brand. So what we do is, the BBC, I think historically, Darren will know more about this than me, but they used to look at BBC One as being the one with all the eyeballs watching it, but BBC Two had a rare but passionate audience looking at classical music on a Friday night, and the BBC never moved that programme because people were too passionate, and so they saw that as integral to their overall brand. And in the same way, we see important articles that, as you say, we've spent hours polishing, loving, researching, and we see it disappear because somebody's watching a cat drag a dog basket across a kitchen on a video. But we just have to decide that both have value and that those, in theory and hopefully in an ideal world, are feeding the other stuff.
Okay, great. I have a feeling that that material along the lines of what we've discussed today is going to keep coming up over the next day and a half, and I hope that it does. And so, yes, I just was going to conclude that I just wanted to thank everybody on the panel, Darren, Maha, and Caroline, for joining us. And if there are any other questions, feel free to track us down later. Fareed?
Thank you, Eric. Finished? You finished?
Yes, we are finished.
Excellent. Yeah.
Now I have to announce, I would like to ask all participants to visit photo exhibition, this number 1, and to be at 3:30 in the lobby for the desert trip. Please be at 3:30. And now it is the certificates. Please, Mr. Abdullah, of appreciation, of course. Come on in. The first one, Caroline. Yeah.
You will come around. Thank you for you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
الله يخليك الله يخليك ميرسي بذوقك وتسلم تسلم تسلم.
أولا نشكرك على محاضرتك
الله يخليك
على حضورك لنا فخر في وكالة الناشئة الإخبارية.
اهلا بك اهلا بك.
نورتينا يا مها نورتينا.
الله يخليك.
دارين دارين.
Thank you. Thank you. Very much for your advice.
It's really good, actually. Interesting. I have copies of everyone's presentation. Like, I want a copy of Darren's.
You know what, I believe
Can you
that
email it to me?
I believe that did I give you back your...
Erik, where are you?
Yes, I put it on there as well.
Erik,
It's on here? Oh.
do you like your certificate or not?
I would love one.
I read a lot.
Thank you. I pretty good session. I really enjoyed that.
عليكم
Very
السلام.
happy. I'm very
عاملة
happy.
ايه؟ ازيك عامل ايه؟ اهلا اهلا. طب كويس، احنا عايزينك تساعدنا. جوجل عايزه تعمل شغل في السعوديه بس احنا ما نعرفش حد هنا.
Okay, welcome.
اهلا بيك.
Raining days, no? They are now in Riyadh. No? Yes, it's not normal, no?
Yeah.
سميرة لو
Aujourd'hui, ça me plaît beaucoup. Il y a 140 jours, il n'y a pas 5. He has his network with media locally. Yes.
No problem. 1994. Senti, ma come ci troviamo questi? Così? Niente. Con questa pioggia. Vabbè. Siamo cambiati.
Qualche no, quand on parle de déontologie, c'est pas pour...
يا الحمد لله خلاص اتس اوكي اونلي ام ويتنج ذا ليتر هيد خذ معنا على ما في مشكله؟ لا انتوا تعالوا انتوا احسن عشان نعرف المعرض هون كذا كل عام يا شباب اشكركم انا اشكرك انت فيديو كنت عم توزن اهم واحد هذا مشان التوثيق هذا اهم شيء بصراحه انه هو هذا الفيديو هذا مشان تتر وما تتر شو هو؟ يلا الان حجيب فتحي يا فتحي بندر محمود تعالوا هون استاذ عبد الرحمن بعد ما تخلص انتوا لازقين جنب بعض انا ببين ازاي والله منورين في الصورة
قشطة يا عم.
في فيديو هاي طيب
في يا عم علمني. الصورة انا جاي صف محمود.
سووا جلسة مغلقة. صورت. طيب انا خويكم في الشركة موظف، ما حد فيكم قاعد تصور معايا. خيانة. والله ما قادر اوقف على ايش. انا وياك كفلت الشركة.